I bet you've been wondering about the JPC-12 antenna. Is it really difficult to tune on 17 meters, 12 meters, 15 meters? How do you get 80 meters on this thing? What would happen if you stacked coils, and what would happen if you added a 17-foot antenna to the stacked coils? And is there anything bad about the radials? We're gonna try to answer all that today, so stick with me and the guy who's out in the field right now, Ham Radio Dude.
Yeah, this episode, we're gonna answer several questions.
Yeah, I already told them that.
All in the name of science. I need different radials.
Sounds like Ham Radio Dude is speaking of foreshadowing.
But the reason for this video, my buddy Morton, LB0FI, he came out with 2 videos about how this might not be the best performing antenna, but also how he couldn't get it to tune on certain bands. I'm taking an approach here, what I would call in the name of scientific accuracy, and I don't know anything about science, but I do know that as we run these tests today, what we're looking for is to hopefully get an idea if this thing can or can't be tuned on all those bands and how easy it might be. I'm trying not to make this subjective, more objective. Was it difficult or easy? And I do it out of no disrespect toward Morton. I consider him a really good guy, but I also want to make sure that one way or another, we have that information out. So with it, I have my radials out. I should get more radio wires.
Is that more foreshadowing?
But we're just doing this right now. Toward the end of the episode, we will try to do things like add and remove more coils, longer antennas, and so forth. But right now, just as it is the JPC-12 difficult to tune? In all its glory, there it is. The JPC-12, we have the actual base unit into the ground spike with the radials. We have 4 different attachments on there. We have our coil in the center, and then we have our stock antenna as well. So let's go ahead and plug in an SO239 with this MPD LMR 400. I decided to stick with the short piece of coax because that way we can't say that the coax is affecting anything as there's no choke in between the coax and the antenna.
Hey dude, I think the first band you should start with is 40 meters.
I can't see. Yeah, well, we're going to start with 40 meters here. And in order to do that, I'm going to check the standing wave ratio from something like, let's actually go 6 meters to, or 6 megahertz, excuse me, to 8 megahertz. And why am I going to do that? Because then I have a wider band and I could see on here where I have a match or if I don't. In this case, I don't. So let's go up to the antenna and adjust the coil to the proper spot. Okay, for 40 meters, we should just adjust it down to here. And probably 1 click up. There we go. Right there.
Great camera angle. I'm going to make sure to leave a horrible comment about it.
It's 1.68, 1.2, yeah, 1.2, 1.2, 1.2. So it's, I would assume to say, I think it's safe to say that we're good in the 40 range. Now, if we wanted to do better, well, could we adjust the coil up to shorten this? 1 click. Yeah, no problem. 40 meters, no problem. Now let's try for 30 meters. And to do that, let's go ahead and go, let's start with 9 megahertz and we're gonna go up to 11 megahertz, okay?
Not much to say about 40. It works as intended. Now, I didn't show the X value and I didn't show the impedance because I think that I showed that in another video.
And yeah, we need to shorten our coil because we know we're resonant down here. So we need to shorten it because we're coming up to 30 meters. I just adjusted this kind of. I was going to start off halfway in between 40 and 20, but I'm actually about 3/4 of the way to the 20 point. And you could see here, I'm still needing to shorten just a little bit because I'm resonant around 9.9 megahertz. So maybe 1-2 more clicks possibly. And that was too much. So now this is a cool thing that's going to start, right? And then, if that doesn't help, it's hard to do this with one hand. I think that's right. Good to go. Yeah, no problem with 30 meters. Let's go to 20. See this little marking right here? Should be 20. And so what happens is we got to make sure that that one piece of metal is touching that right. Yep, it looks like that should be good for 20. Let's go down here. Man, it's hot out here today. If you appreciate me being out here in the heat, go ahead and hit like, comment, share this with a friend, please.
I mean, subscribing is free. I don't ask for money. I don't ask for membership programs, and it doesn't cost you a dime. 75.9% of the people watching these videos statistically aren't subscribed to the channel, and that hurts me badly in the algorithm.
Yep, no problem with 20 tuned up just like that. Let's go to, I guess what would be next, 17. 18.1 is what we'll shoot for. And let's see here. I'm just going to make the assumption that we're going to click that up, that one 2 up. Just 1 click up. And also let's go here. We're going to go 17 to 19 on the chart, okay? And it looks like we could afford to go up some clicks. And let's just put it toward 18.1, 130 would be fine, right? 126 is cool. We're at 8 to 1. Let's go ahead and shorten this a little bit more. We're at 4 to 1. I think we're making progress here. That was 2 clicks, but I'm gonna try it. We're at 3 to 1. Now let's see where we are all the way down around 16 megahertz or 17 megahertz, 1.9. So we need to keep shortening it, right? Not a problem. You know it's gonna happen, right? 2 more clicks up and we're at 2.7 to 1. So does it seem difficult? Yeah, well, maybe, but maybe we just shorten this a little bit, right? You could tell here we're getting closer, as now around 17 we're at 1.4 to 1. And I'm just gonna keep going to town here real quick. All right, we're at 1.9 to 1, which I would not necessarily prefer, but I could do that. I'm gonna hit this coil up real quick here. Actually went up 2 clicks on the coil, putting us at about 1.75 to 1. And of course, we still are more resonant down here at the 17 megahertz, excuse me, area. So a lot of that was said to say, make sure your coil's all the way up. After just a moment or so, here's what I came up with. I brought the coil down to about 2.5, 3 down. Maybe I could slightly adjust it a little bit more. But then I also brought the antenna down slightly. And let's just take a look here at what we got. So it was a little more difficult, I can't deny that. And I'm at 1.69 to 1, with my lowest being 1.53 to 1, somewhere around 17.50. Now the combination of the coil and the antenna, you know, obviously standing wave ratio isn't everything. So let's take a look here. Yeah, let's take a look here by going back up to 18.120 or whatever. 26 is fine. Let's go into here and go to our impedance value and see where we're at with our impedance. Impedance is at 67 ohms. So of course, again, we'd like to be somewhere around 50 ohms, which is at 17.5, which also consequently was our lowest standing wave ratio, was right around there, right? Let's go back into here and go to our reactance, or our X value. That wants to be as close to 0 as possible. It's negative 26. What happens if we adjust the coil up or down? Okay, X is negative 26 right now. And as I do this, excuse me, it goes to negative 70 when I bring the coil down, right? So what if I just take the coil to the last, a little bit of a loop here, negative 25 ohms, okay? So what happens if I take the coil completely off? With nothing being hidden, here's what I ended up doing. I put the coil back on. I have 1 click left in the coil, which means I'm essentially at the top of the coil, as you can see here. Then I shorten the antenna a little bit, right? And in order to get the standing wave ratio here of 1.35 to 1 with an impedance of around 50 ohms, 45.8 ohms, and then our X value is going to be a little bit low, as negative 12, I think. Yeah, negative 13, negative 12. I added more radials. Now, this looks like a bunch of radials, right? And it kind of is. But adding radials to your JPC-12 was suggested in the comments in my original video, and I'd agree. You know, you have a very minimal amount of radials out here as it is. So if you add more wire, now this, like I said, is overkill. I'm using antenna wire from DX Engineering, but that's this is from another antenna anyway. But that got me 17 meters. Was it difficult?
It was easy to get under a 2 to 1 standing wave ratio, which I would use in the field, no problem. To get the most optimal performance, the radio wires were needed, which is ironic because I said that toward the beginning of the episode. Next up, 15 meters.
But here we're going to go to standing wave ratio. We're going to start with, let's start with 20 megahertz and let's go up to 22 megahertz. And let's shoot for somewhere around 21.5 just for the sake of this, right? Hey, 21.5, look at that. We're already at 2.8 to 1. So with the coil all the way up, what happens if we just shorten the antenna more, right?
Yeah, so 21.5 is a little bit higher than 15 meters. You know, the band plan is like what, 21 to 21,450 or something along those lines. And it doesn't necessarily matter because if we can get a match at 21.5, we can get a match at 21,450.
Remember, we got the extra radials on. I'm keeping them on now. 2.5 to 1. Let's widen this a little bit. Okay, so I'm hurting today. 18 to 22, right? And we could still see that we're probably resonant. We're working our way up. Let's, we're gonna remove the coil. And it's gonna happen, right? But let's just bring this down here, this antenna down more. And we can't seem at this point to get below, you know, 2.6, 2.6, 2.4, 2.5. Let me just go ahead and bring this out to 26 just to see what we're at there. 2.10, 2.04. Yeah, we can't get under 2 to 1 on 12 meters or 15 meters. Now, we could try as much as we want to, I guess, add our radials again because they kind of fell off. I just have this kind of on here and willy-nilly, but still that's not going to really help too much, right? 1.74, 1.6. Well, I mean 1.6, that's fine. Now we're about to ask a question is are these radials that are currently on here even working? We're going to test that in a minute. But 1.6 to 2 at 21.5 with the coil all the way up and the antenna shortened quite a bit. 55 ohms, X value, reactance X. And we're at, you know, negative 24 for the X value, which is kind of really low. But then again, what happens if we remove the coil?
So keeping the coil in line is basically adding a little bit of length to the overall antenna, because even though we're all the way up on the coil, which should mean that we're kind of bypassing the coil stops at what, 2 loops, right? Or 2 wraps, if you will, which means we've added a little length onto the coil. If we remove the coil, we're shortening it quite a bit, I think is how it's going to go. And my assumption would be at that point that because we removed the coil and we shortened it, we might need to lengthen the antenna. Let's see what dude has to say in the field.
After making that adjustment, a little bit more length, we're back down to 1.66 to 1 at 21.5, and our impedance should probably be around 50 ohms, 46 ohms probably, 53 ohms. Okay, and then our reactance will probably be at the same spot as well. Let's jump up to 12 meters first. And to do that, let's go 21 megahertz up to, yeah, we'll keep it at 26. And go back to the standing wave ratio, and we'll try to adjust some more. Okay, so what are we going to do here? We're going to go up to 12 meters. Let's just, right now, leave it here. All right, I didn't put much of an effort into it. All I did was shorten the antenna a little bit. And it looks like I could probably shorten it a little bit more. I'm not perfectly in 12 meters. I'm at 24.253 at 1.69 to 1. And again, if we go to our impedance, man, it's hot out here, 54 ohms. We do have, listen, we do have the radials on, that the custom radials at the moment, okay? And let's just go back into here. And we're at 169. If I take those off, we're at 226. Keep all those in mind because we're going to try something here in a second. But first, again, if you're operating parks on the air, you'll be fine.
So was 12 meters easy to tune? Well, I don't know, because 12 meters is 24.890 to 24.990 or something like that. But even at 24.390 or wherever I was, all that is a very fine adjustment on the antenna, very short adjustment on the antenna to get a better match. And with that, the added radials were really the key to successfully getting the lowest match possible. Again,
there, your X value probably isn't the best. I should also point out that I am next to a house, okay? So, you know, maybe there's a little bit of a factor there, but my X value is at negative 26 there on 12 meters. Still, we should be able to not use a tuner and operate amateur radio on 12 meters. Now let's go to 10 meters, which shouldn't be a problem on here. I have like 7 other things that I want to test today. Hold on a second. For my next trick, I'm going to go ahead and try 27 megahertz up to about 32 megahertz. And again, just bringing down the length of the antenna there's no coil on here. Put the coil on, but remember, then you might have to lengthen or shorten things slightly. Yeah, we're at 1.8 to 1 standing wave ratio at 28.349. Now let's just check our impedance, let's check our X values and all that good jazz. 50 ohms, like almost nearly perfect, right? So I bet you, let's see here, I'm not going to bet anything. We're doing science. Negative 26 on the X, I was going to call it the X factor. Yeah, so again, your X values are all over the place on this. However, what happens if we remove that radio wire and we're at negative 22? Interesting, huh? Negative 23, negative 25 with the extra radio wires, negative 22 without them, and then our impedance, this is 10 meters, no coil, negative 44 ohms. Now with the extra radio wires, 49 ohms, more of a perfect match with extra radio wires. And finally, let's just kind of jump up to our standing wave ratio and do the same thing. No radials, 1.86, radials, 1.79. So it dropped it a little bit there. We're 28.468 somehow. Let's add the coil. I think I'm doing my best to stay somewhat organized, and so yeah, let's try to get a coil in there. All right, and no coil on here yet, but I do predict when we add the coil, we're gonna have to shorten the length here, because guess what, the coil has a couple of turns that are connected, which it makes the antenna a little bit longer, right? Just as mentioned, here we are on 28.486 and we're at 2 to 1. I bet you if we go down the band, yeah, then we start to lose it. So as I thought, we added length when we added the coil back into place, so I'm trying to get close to that. All we have to do now is just go ahead and, I guess it is shorten it a little bit more, right? Let's shorten it even a little bit more, 1.83, 1.71, 1.7, so there we are. Now, let's go ahead and add back in those radials, right? Boom. 1.87, huh? 1.75, so the radials aren't needed for 10. At this point, I think it's kind of apparent one of two things. We either need extra radio wires for those different bands. We don't need them actually, because I was still able to get it to tune up without the extra radio wires. But to bring it down even more, extra radio wires, which, hey, why not? But let's also see if the radios are working. But before we do that, let's just try 6 meters here. I don't know about this one at all.
Camera overheated. I bypassed the coil. I bypassed the 4 extension pieces. I went directly into the spike with the antenna.
So here's what we got now, 6 meters, right? So we have our spike, we have the antenna partially up, and then we go into here. Let's see, single frequency, no, frequency range. 48 megahertz, 1.37, 49, 1.5. That would mean that if we shorten this just a tad, I need to get away from here also. If we shorten that just a tad, now at 50.476 megahertz, we're at 1.37 to 1, which is almost our best standing wave ratio, 1.31 to 1 at 49. A little bit shorter, and guess what? 1.37 to 1 at 50.9. Okay, so with that, what are we going to see for our impedance value? It's going to be low, 36 ohms. You know, you want to be around 50. Can you still operate at 37? You can. And let's add some extra radio wires and see what happens now. And as far as I know, this isn't supposed to be a 6 meter antenna, but I don't have the manual around here. 34 ohms. Okay, so we did affect our impedance when we added those radials, which I just took off. With that though, let's take a look at our X value. X equals 1.7, okay? That's better than negatives and all that good jazz, right?
6 meters, I was easily able to discover that removing the coil and the 4 extender pieces would allow me to get a good match. However, if I didn't have a network analyzer and antenna analyzer with me, I think I might have some difficulties finding the match because, for example, like the Yaesu FT891, it only tells me my standing wave ratio at certain spots. And, you know, I could check the bottom portion of the band, the top portion of the band, but I can't check a wider selection. So having that antenna analyzer for a wider frequency range really does help out to figure out what's going on.
I hope you can see that okay. I have my multimeter here. I am gonna grab, first of all, I'm gonna take both of these prongs, and you could hear that. And now I'm on the actual piece of metal, and I have conductivity. Now I'm gonna take one of the ends of the radio wires and put my tongue on it.
Oh, what do we have going on here? This could be the problem with the JPC-12. Now, number one, we've already talked about add more radials, and that's going to stand the rest of the episode. I don't need to tell you that anymore. But as I was watching this video, and I got this big brain moment, what's happening? You got the ground spike. You have your ring connector or your terminal connector, which is that little one that's connecting all the radio wires. And then you have the base unit where your coax will plug into, the black unit on top. And if you noticed just a second ago, as I was checking for continuity, I called it conductivity. Yeah, that was kind of shaking around the ring connector, but also I noticed that the ground spike onto the base connector wasn't completely seated. And why is that? And why does that matter? Well, that is being caused by the ring connector being the current way that it is. If we took that ring connector and flipped it around 180 degrees, the flat part would be on top of the actual base connector, and the other part that lips out wouldn't be affected by the ground spike. And I wanted to point that out because big brain, I never thought of that, and that's kind of a huge deal right there. Now, with that even further though, hold on. Yeah, those radio wires are a little bit knotted up, but with that further, if we have it like this and it's an intermittent connection and this piece is moving around because maybe a little wind or whatever, you could be throwing off your results all day long. So that's a huge deal there. Make sure that that is flipped the other way around. I'm not saying that that's what was going on with Morton because I don't know. I'm not saying that that was why I was having some weird results, because adding more radio wires definitely was my fix. But I could definitely see that being an issue for you in the future. And yeah, I love testing. It's the coolest thing, isn't it? Get out on radio, enjoy amateur radio, go test things. But let's continue this video.
Just kidding. I broke away some of the wire, as you could see here. Now I could probably actually take apart these two pieces of wire even further and stretch them apart. But anyway, here we go. I have my finger on the wire with the prong for the multimeter. And the radio wires, sorry for the wind, the radio wires seem to be effective, meaning I'm getting continuity between the end of the wires and here. So the solution appears to be...
Just to clarify, we still have more of the video to go, more testing to do, fun experimental stuff. But for the conclusion on that, radials, add more radials. We talked about it. Radials, make sure your current radials are properly seated. And then number 3, testing your equipment before going out to the field to know what kind of flaws that it might have, but even furthermore, to get an understanding of where things roughly should be so you're not trying to mess with it in the field while your time is valuable and you're trying then to make contacts. Let's get to the next part, because this part's kind of cool and fun. Not that that last part wasn't cool and fun.
First, we're going to go ahead and put all the elements back on, okay? The 4 elements. And make this like a center-loaded coil dipole, or center-loaded coil vertical. Did I say that right? Yeah. But we're going to add 2 coils to it, so it's going to be basically 2 times the coils, and we're going to kind of play around with that to see what happens, okay? I don't know what's going to happen. Yeah, whatever. Also, I think it's safe to say that we've concluded that more radio wires on this would be a better option. So during these tests, I'm going to leave more radio wires on. See, 25 of them at 11 feet each. Extra. With that, I'm going to start with both coils all the way to the bottom, all the way down here and all the way down here. And then we're going to take a look and see where are we resonant at its lowest frequency.
With the added coil and the extra radials, the lowest I can get a standing wave ratio to look good was around 4.6 or 4.3 megahertz. So we wouldn't pick up 80 meters. And at this point, I decided to go ahead and add a 17-foot antenna. So we had the stacked coils and a 17-foot antenna. Let's see what happens. Spectrum between, spectrum, I have a readout between 3 megahertz and 4 megahertz. And yeah, we're going to have this here at 1.59 to 1 at 3.44 megahertz. If we go into here, we can click our impedance. Let's check that out. Again, we do have our extra radio wires on. We're at 76 ohms. What happens if we remove those radio wires? 77 ohms, not a huge difference there, right? Okay, so you are a little bit high on the impedance, but again, it will work. You know, this is a compromised antenna, so well, yeah, negative 12 on the X factor, or X value, excuse me, X factor. That sounds bad. Anyway, in order now to adjust this, we're at, let's see what I say, 1.55 to 1. And if we go up to, let's try to go 3.85, right? 14 to 1, because it's a very narrow bandwidth. And with that, okay, what are we going to do here? This is a good question. So, let's try to adjust this one first to be short. The answer is I don't know. Let's try to adjust this one first to be shorter. And I just went like that. I don't know the answer. Yeah, that was easy. Just that little bit of an adjustment on that bottom portion of the coil that you saw now allows me to be at 3.857 and I'm at 1.5 to 1. My impedance is still kind of wacky, right? 75 ohms probably. 68 ohms, so it's a little bit better, I guess. And then here we are with our X value of negative 17. I don't have a lot of time. Camera keeps overheating. With that, let me just check one more thing. The question is now, what happens if we try to get, 40 meters, which would typically be right here on the coil, but we have two coils. I bypassed the coil and there's two more loops essentially, or two more coils, two more wraps around the coil. So my theory would be that in order to get 40 meters, we just have to bring this down too, because these two are compensating for it. Can we get 40 meters with two coils on here? Probably not, since we have a 17-foot antenna, and that's going to throw a lot of things off. So now we got to figure out where on these two coils do we need to be. Right now I have this one all the way up, and this one, because of the compensation for the antenna, I'm just going to put halfway up and I'm going to start trying some things and taking a look at the SWR meter. There you go. 1.41, 1.39 to 1 at 7.09. Of course, we could adjust the coil more if we needed to. And what does that tell us? Our impedance value is now 66 ohms. Hey, we got it to tune up on 80 and 40. So is it going to be a performer? Yeah, I'm just showing that we can tune it up and everything like that. No matter what, it's a compromise, right? You're going to get 80. 80 is not going to be the greatest band in the world, even with a million radio wires, with two coils, with a 17-foot antenna, but we did get it to tune. I got to tell you, I'm hot. Let's go inside and let's talk about our results today and just kind of talk about some findings, okay? Okay, let's get started here with the conclusion by saying one thing to Morton and hoping I don't completely butcher it. Hatten av fordai. Hats off to you, Morton, I hope. And the reason for that is you did some research on a product, you tested it out, you came to a conclusion. A lot of people thought that you might be incorrect in your conclusion, and you reevaluated it. And I think that that's a very important thing to do in the name of science, or the name of testing, right? And that helps me with my final decision. Is the JPC-12 antenna difficult to tune? I would say that after adding radio wires and checking to make sure your radio wires are properly connected, and finally having an antenna analyzer and testing your equipment prior to deploying out into the field are huge reasons and things that may sway your opinion one way or another. And that's why I can't conclude objectively that the JPC-12 antenna is easy to tune. If you, the viewer at home, is asking my opinion, did I find the JPC-12 antenna easy to tune? I would tell you after I confirmed those things with the radio wires and I did some testing, now that I understand where certain things need to be tuned, yeah, it's pretty easy. But if I were just to go out in the field, I would have had a completely different opinion on things. And that's why it's always important to test your equipment if there's anything you get from this episode. But furthermore, there's going to be a lot of people asking me why I didn't try to make contacts and why I didn't test this and why I didn't test that. It's because it's 88 degrees out, I'm hot, and I only have so much time in my day. I would love to, in the future, go out and hopefully maybe even do a live stream where I test these things so you could see at that time how difficult it is to tune and how difficult or easy it is to make contacts. But until then, I think you should go give Morton a shout out for giving it another shot. And I hope you enjoyed this video. I try to make these videos short, but they always end up long because I feel like there's a lot of good information that could be acquired from these kind of videos. Until next time, this channel is Ham Radio Dude 73.